known as Joseph Singleton. Now, Joseph Singleton was a rice farmer with 3 children and a wife, living in Africa in the area now known as Sierra Leone. He was captured one day and suffered the misfortune of being traded on the slave market. In 1839, Portuguese slavers took him, and along with about 110 others, they put them on a ship to Cuba, sold them to a couple of Spaniards who wanted to use them in Cuba to work in the sugar fields and in the sugar factories. A lot of slaves died in the sugar factories because those fires were so hot that they had to use to refine that sugar. Many times they would just die from just the heat coming off of the ovens. It was really bad. But hey, you're just a slave, so we can use you today. We lose one, hey, we buy another one. We'll put them in there. We get this work done. Well, because of the work of Olaudah Equiano, who helped to get this bill passed, the Slave Act bill passed, where they could not do international trade on the waters. This was an illegal act. The Portuguese passed a similar bill, and they were not allowed to sell or buy slaves in the international waters from another country. So it was an illegal act from the beginning. Well, they finally got Singleton and those people onto the Amistad. Anybody here read about the Amistad or see the movie The Amistad? Yes. Well, this is the young man who took care of business on the Amistad. Singleton, when he was above deck, found a loose board and had a nail in it, old rusty nail. He took that rusty nail and he hid that nail and he kept that nail and he talked to the other men on the ship, and they were from all different countries, but somehow they managed to communicate. He said, look, we're going to get out of here. We're going to take over the ship. At night, took that nail out, picked his lock, picked the locks of the other men. They got some knives, some sugar cane knives that had in the back, and they took over the ship. They ended up having to kill the captain and the cook. 2 of them got away, but there were 2 left on the ship to navigate. Now, Singleton ensured that they would travel east toward Africa during the day, but at night, when there were no stars out, the guys were pretty slick, and they started going northwest. Well, they ended up on Long Island. They had captured by a U.S. naval vessel, and they were arrested, charged with murder, and charged with mutiny. So they took those guys, tried them in the American courts, and guess what? The court said, hey, these guys didn't do anything wrong. They were protecting themselves in self-defense. You sold them illegally. You bought them illegally. You need to take them back to Africa or wherever they want to go. District court, circuit court. They weren't done with that. These 2 Spaniards wanted their property. Well, it ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court. And these gentlemen, these Africans, were represented by an ex-president, John Quincy Adams. And needless to say, the court ruled that, no, these men are free. They acted in self-defense. You must release them, send them back to Africa or wherever they want to go. So Singleton built on what Olaudah Equiano had accomplished to fight injustice and challenge the system, and he left his footprints on the road to freedom. This past New Year's Day, January 1st, 2013, we celebrated the 150th year, or I like this word, sesquicentennial. That's 150 years. We celebrated the sesquicentennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a wartime measure issued by Abraham Lincoln, who set the United States on a path of ending slavery. Now, there's a lot of controversy about Abraham Lincoln, whether he had slaves, we didn't have any slaves, whether he was racist, or whether he just, his actions weren't anything. However, it did fuel the fire of enslaved people to strike for their freedom. This presidential order allowed black men to join the army and fight for their freedom. Now, Abraham Lincoln changed over time. When he grew up, he didn't relate to any black people. He didn't know any black people. But he hated slavery. He saw the cruelties of slavery in his home of Kentucky. But when Abraham Lincoln became president and moved to Washington, D.C., he had an opportunity to deal with black people. He had an opportunity to look into their souls and look into their lives to see that they were more than just people, more than just things or inferior people, but they had aspirations and dreams. Elizabeth Keckley was born a slave in Dinwiddie, Virginia. And after 38 years of being enslaved, she bought herself and her son freedom. Elizabeth Keckley was told when she was just a young girl by her master that she'd never be worth her salt. Basically, you never amount to anything. She proved them wrong. She moved to Washington, D.C. after she got her freedom, and she ended up being the dressmaker for the president's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. Now, what does this have to do with Abraham Lincoln? Well, you know what? Abraham Lincoln didn't know black people. He thought that the best thing for black people were to set them free and send them back to Africa because they could not live together with white people. But you know what? This lady became the best friend, not only a dressmaker, but the best friend of Mary Todd Lincoln. And you know what? Abraham Lincoln had to see her every day, in and out of the White House. He had to talk to her. He got to know her. He got to know her and other people, other black people, on a personal level. That changed his whole mindset. Abraham Lincoln viewed blacks as people with dreams and aspirations. So yes, Elizabeth Keckley and other blacks living in Washington, D.C. affected Abraham Lincoln's judgment and allowed him to put forth a bill that allowed black men to fight for their freedom. And as a result of the Civil War, we have progressed along that road to freedom. It's not over yet. Elizabeth Keckley left her footprint to road to freedom. Now, these are some heroes and heroines that paved the road to freedom. But they're not the only ones. There are others. They made the way for people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Jackie Robinson, Malcolm X, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., Thurgood Marshall, General Daniel Chapman James, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Ben Chase, Bertha Maxwell, Dr. Franklin McKinney, my mother, your pastor. You fill in the blank. They talked about some people today who made some progress on this road to freedom. You fill in the blank. That teacher that cared enough about you to tell you the right thing. Your mother who inspired you. That young man or young woman who was your friend and helped you out when you had a hard lesson. We're on this road. Everybody reach back. Reach back and take somebody with you. Leave your footprints in the road to freedom.